Welcome to Be Provided Conservation Radio, sharing stories and information about the environment, wildlife, and the people who are dedicating their lives to protect the world for future generations. These inspirational stories will take you from the Santa Cruz Mountains to remote areas of Africa.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Be Provided Conservation Radio. I'm excited for our show today. I am talking to actually another podcast host, Ayana Young. She hosts the popular podcast called For the Wild. So Ayana is also a lover and protector of wild nature. She was studying ecology at Columbia University when the Occupy Wall Street movement began. Amid the burgeoning resistance in Zuccotti Park, she co-created the Environmental Working Group to help orient the movement to the realities of the suffering planet. From there, she moved west to her beloved Cascadian bioregion, starting an organic farm and wild foods cartel on an Oregon mountaintop. In Portland, she had the fortune of learning from the herbalist Cascade Anderson Geller before her passing. Ayana is currently studying restoration of natural systems at Victoria, British Columbia, and creating an ecological research center and native species nursery in the southern tip of the Cascadian bioregion. Along with restoration of damaged landscapes, Ayana is committed to protecting intact ecosystems. So again, Ayana hosts For the Wild podcast, formerly called Unlearn and Rewild, and she teaches us about empowered earth stewardship, leads biodiversity enhancement workshops, and facilitates panels across North America. So a very exciting show today. Welcome to Be Provided Conservation Radio, Ayana. I'm honored to have you here on the show today.
I feel so happy to be here with you, and it's a beautiful sunny morning, and talking about conservation is by far one of my favorite things to talk about, so thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I saw some pictures of your cabin in the redwoods and where you do some of your work as well. So I picture you sitting at your desk with a backdrop of redwood trees and with animals and natural sounds and smells and such. Is that true? Are you there today?
Yeah, you pretty much painted the picture of what it looks like and what I'm doing.
Awesome.
That's what it's like out here.
So you said you just finished feeding the animals. I know you mentioned you have a cat. Do you have other animals that you care for?
I have 3 cats and 3 dogs.
Oh,
and I wish I had more, and maybe I will add more at some point. But they're such a wonderful pack, and they wander through the woods with me. They bring so much joy to my life, and I don't usually think of myself as an animal person, but then I laugh. It's good to be out here with the tree people and the plant people and the dog and cat people. They make up a lot of my day.
Oh, that's wonderful. It could be a lot worse, that's for sure. That sounds great. From my research, I realized that you really didn't have that much exposure to the natural world until you were in your mid-20s. And I believe you grew up, was it Orange County? And then you moved to college in New York City around, was it 2011 or so?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like there was that time that was happening in New York City with the Occupy Wall Street that kind of shifted you toward a new direction. I don't know if that's when you started getting more involved with the natural world, but can you tell us more about what that time did, to move you towards what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. I love thinking back to that time. I think it was September 2011 that Occupy happened, and you're right. Before that time, I had grown up in Orange County. I had lived in Los Angeles and San Francisco, and I did not have a cultural connection to the natural world. I wasn't raised in it. It wasn't something we did as a family unit to go off into the woods or the desert or anything like that. And Occupy happened, and I was studying environmental sciences at Columbia at the time. So I had been interested in the environment, and I was searching fiercely to find a community and to find a culture that was dedicated to the environment. And grad school really wasn't that, but I was hoping it would be. So I was at grad school, and then I heard about Occupy, and I went down. I got on my little bike with my wicker basket in the back that carried my dog Mushi, and I was so fired up. It was like my whole body and mind just became electric, and I was surrounded by people who were passionate and angry and full of love and rage for what was happening. And but there wasn't so much of an environmental spin at Occupy. It was people were enraged by economic disparity and social justice issues, but the environment wasn't a topic of conversation. The first day I went down there was in early September, and I had met a man who was living at Occupy. He was camping down there, and we quite instantly fell in love. It was a really amazing activist love story. And especially, like, I'll share this little tidbit. I was a total germophobic at the time, and here he is, like, living on the street, eating out of dumpsters. And I knew I really loved him because I was like, wait, why am I so attracted to this person that is doing these things that I've been completely encultured to be unattracted to? But that's just a little tangent. So we met, and we decided to start the Environmentalist Solidarity Working Group, and to orient the movement towards the realities of our suffering planet. And I had never been a political organizer. I had never been in protest culture, activist culture. So it was so new. And to simultaneously be falling in love and being like falling in love with somebody through this passion for the earth and be working and falling in love with activism. It all happened at once in this big swirling tornado. It was amazing. And yeah, we would, what would I say, lead these 100 people groups about the environment and what we should do. A lot at that time, we were focused around fracking issues because we were in New York City. Fracking had not been outlawed in certain areas as it has now. And so we were working a lot on fracking. We were working a lot in between groups. And then once the Occupy movement got tossed out of Zuccotti Park from the Homeland Security, there's so much that got lost because the centralized hub had been taken over, and that really dispersed the energy a lot. And so that winter, we decided to travel down to South America because at that time, and I had never camped. I had never been in real wilderness places. And here I am in Patagonia, in a place that is so wild and rugged. And there were just these unfinished dirt road highways for miles and miles and miles. And I really got to be just so present with the wilderness.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It opened me up in a way that I had never been awoken. And in that time as well, there was no radio stations. We were in this little beat up rent-a-car. And so March, who is the man I met at Occupy, he had something he had something called podcast on his phone, which I didn't actually even know what a podcast was at the time. And so we would just listen to these really apocalyptic radio shows, podcasts about global issues and environmental issues and social justice issues and health and healing. And that really was a part of what sparked my journey to create the For the Wild podcast. But I would say that time in particular, that was 2011, 2012, the combination of political organizing and community activism mixed with a total, just surprise or I don't even know, a momentous love affair with the wild. Those two things, as they collided, created the life that I live now. And it was a really important time for me.
I guess in March 2011, too, I think Fukushima happened, too, and you were affected by that. You were trying to find a safe place to live and to go to. Was that when you ended up in Patagonia, or what happened there? Did you go in search of safe places all across the world, or, did you find it?
Well, yeah, I wasn't looking for that safe place in Patagonia at the time because I was just really learning about all of the toxicity and disasters and collapses happening. And so that was more of the door opening. And then once I was in the room of that truth, that I came back and I left New York City a few months later, and we moved out to a cedar cabin in northern Oregon in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And then I was really, I was just so invested in learning about nuclear power plants and fracking sites and offshore drilling and pretty much every type of major resource extraction project that humanity was leading and where they were and what kind of toxicity and fallout was happening. And so when Fukushima hit, I was mortified for the oceans, of course, for the whole world, because I knew what that meant. And although this isn't getting news right now, Japan is passing, I don't think it's a bill or a law necessarily, but they have, the power plant has basically requested to dump the poisoned water from the power plant into the ocean every day, because they say there's absolutely no way they can store this contaminated water from the spent fuel rods and etc. So although it's not getting news, which is crazy that's not getting more visibility, that's what's happening. That obviously there's already been so much that's gone into the ocean, but now it's actually, they're requesting that they can dump every day. I think it's thousands, maybe it's like a huge number into the oceans. And so at the time when it happened, I knew that the cesium-137, and I knew that toxicity would be coming down on the rain, not just in the Pacific Northwest, everywhere eventually, but I knew that we would be being hit hard. And I got really afraid. And so March and I started traveling around the world, and not everywhere, but I remember us looking in the Northeast, and we went to New Zealand because we thought, okay, that seems to be the safest bet. And we went down to New Zealand, and of course we somehow attracted the activists there. And there was a lot of signs at the time with these skull and crossbones. Oh. And so we were sitting with this man, and I said, what are these skull and crossbones? And some of them said no 1080. And he explained that 1080 was a poison that was aerial dropped and is aerial dropped on all of the forest lands and national parks in New Zealand. And they also drop it on private lands. If you don't want it on your private land, they won't. But it's like if they drop it on your neighbor's land, it's kind of like you also have it, because it gets into the water, and it's a poison that has an attractant in it that supposedly is trying to kill the invasive possum that's eating the native birds. But as we know, when we drop a poison with an attractant, it's not going to only attract the one species you want to kill. And so deer will eat it, and their death will be extremely painful, 3 days of kicking their stomach out. Of course, birds eat it. So it's kind of like these apocalypses that happen and kill these species in the area, and then it gets into the water. And the highest cancer rates in the country are by these big areas of park. And when I found that out, it felt like a slap in the face and a punch in the gut, because here I was so afraid of what was happening to the world. And I thought I had gone to the place that was far away with water and all these things. I thought I had found the promised land, and to learn that it wasn't the promised land, and that of course there are safer places, but there is nowhere that has not been raped and pillaged and poisoned. That's what we're in right now. And so after I kind of got through the shock and the grief, not over it, but through it, I almost felt this sense of relief because I realized that there's nowhere to run, and I needed to stand where I loved and to fight like hell for that place. And for me, where I love is the temperate rainforest from Northern California to Southeast Alaska, the Pacific Northwest. It's where I feel completely enraptured at all times by the ecosystem. And so I decided to come back and root and invest my energy and time and love to this land, knowing that it has been poisoned, knowing that it has been completely, for the most part, clear cut, knowing that Fukushima is raining down on it, knowing all of, not all, of course, but many of the issues that are facing this region, but realizing that I'm going to die. We're all going to die. Mortality is coming, for all of us. So I needed to, it was important for me to die with the place that I loved. And so I kind of, in a way, had to reckon with what it meant to be alive in this very toxic time, and that it's very possible that it will shorten my lifespan. And how do I reckon with that and still stand for where I love? And so it's that type of thought process is something that I work through all the time. I mean, if not a daily basis, a weekly basis, to feel the fear coming up. And, there's a lot going on right now with climate chaos and the Anthropocene and other resource extraction projects, and just feel the fear and then realize, okay, I need to breathe through this because I'm not going to get away from it. And I don't want to live my life out of fear. I want to live my life intelligently, and I want to prepare for an uncertain future. But that's what we're in. And it's going to be uncertain. Although we can predict certain things, there is a type of, it's not like a giving up. It's not like that. And it's not even an acceptance, like things are okay. It's more just dealing with the reality, but still getting through it to have impact and influence, and not giving up on what we can do about the predicaments that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. And, you seem to be living that example that helps others go, okay, I can do this too. I live in the Redwoods too, here in Santa Cruz Mountains, and I'm surrounded by beauty daily. I try to concentrate on that, the birds, the animals, the bobcats and such. My podcasts concentrate on the survival of wildlife in general. I wanted to talk to you today because I don't think that our wildlife really has a hope if we're not protecting our native grasslands and our temperate rainforests. And they need that biodiversity as well as us humans. These indigenous cultures within these areas are also suffering a great deal. So I wanted to talk to you about For the Wild's land-based commitments that you have, like the 1 Million Redwoods Project and the Tongass Old Growth Campaign. And I was hoping to first talk about the 1 Million Redwoods project that you started. It seemed like a very successful Kickstarter campaign. And what got you motivated to start that? It sounded like we were leading into that conversation a bit, but you can continue on what got you going with that.
Well, so after I left New York and then I went to Oregon, and that's when I really had my honeymoon stage with the temperate rainforest, and I knew I wanted to be there. I started looking for a place to root and ground, and I found that place in the Redwood coastal mountain range. And so I came down here, and I was spending so much time with the forest, and I had been for the last few years, and I had really understood in an experiential way as well as an intellectual way what the temperate rainforest were dealing with in terms of logging and all that comes from the resource extraction of the forest, which erosion and creeks drying up and salmon being suffocated through the erosion from the logging, and the biodiversity that was lost and the soil that was lost through this massive resource extraction of the forest, which I know the statistic, there's somewhere between 2 to 4% of all old growth left globally. So you could imagine what that means for the temperate rainforest of how much has been logged. And my time in the forest, and I was a commercial mushroom hunter for a while, so I really got to see clear cuts versus second growth, third growth, fourth growth, plantation forests. And when I was in an old growth forest, it was like, oh gosh, the beauty was just amazing. And the feeling of it was so powerful. And of course, the biodiversity of plants and fungi and moss was just stunning. And then sometimes second growth forest, depending if they were able to go for a while, looked really beautiful. And you could feel the vitality was coming back and the trees were getting bigger and there was uneven age tree distribution and things like that. And then the plantation forests felt like twilight zones. They felt like dead zones with these strange trees just crammed into one another. And there was nothing growing on the soil except for, a few maybe Oregon grapes, a few hardy pioneer plants here and there. Later, I learned that a lot of the reasoning for that is because the forest lands get sprayed with different poisons to stop plant growth, understory growth, so that the profitable tree gets to have, it's just like a cornfield, but it's, instead of corn, it's a Douglas fir tree. And so with all this information, I was really questioning, what can I do for the forest? What can I do? And I had been studying restoration ecology at the University of Victoria at the time, so I was building up a toolkit of restoration. And I went to this place that is the confluence of these two waterways. And I was looking up at the alders and the vine maples, and I was just kind of praying, like, how can I support you? And what I heard from them was to plant their children and to make sure that they could survive in a changing time. And so for the past 6-7 years now, I've really been trying to understand how to do reforestation with integrity, with a holistic lens that isn't giving into the reforestation industrial complex or conventional methods that use a lot of energy and resources in terms of plastic and water and imported potting soil that have ingredients like lava rock or peat moss or things like that have to be mined or taken from somewhere else. And so the 1 Million Redwoods Project was born during this time of questioning. And I spent years in research and development and relationship building and trial testing different types of pots, whether it was recycled pots from vineyards or if it was these compressed pine pots from France that fell apart, or it was, I was really just looking for how I could do this that felt good. And I don't think that there's any way to have the project use no fossil fuels or no types of plastic resources. I really wish I could find that way. And I'm not finding that in a pure form, but what I'm finding is that there are ways to do less harm. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm really focused on. And it's beautiful. The nursery there's a nursery as part of the project where you could kind of imagine a mix between an arboretum and a permaculture site and a nursery all in one, and a living library. And it's a combination of a lot of different design theory. And something we're doing is we're creating these in-ground pots, for instance, for the tree seedlings. So they don't have to go in plastic, and the water will hold a lot better because it's not going to evaporate as quickly in a hot black plastic pot. We're using native black-cap raspberries and manzanitas to be the fencing rather than having to get metal deer fence for the, for the many. Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And it's also these create shade for the seedlings so that we don't have to get shade cloth and build structures for that. So the last few weeks has been really exciting because so much of the work up until this point has been dealing with the rewards for the Kickstarter, planting out trees for that part of the project, building relationships, doing all these trials, doing a lot of research on different species and genetic variations. And recently, I've been able to really be out in the field and take cuttings from different plants and high up in the treetops. And we've been planting a lot, thousands upon thousands of redwoods and other species of understory plants and Pacific yew trees, and it's really, really exciting. So the project is, it's feeling good because it's becoming physical again, which is nice.
Right. Yeah, it's nice to get back out there. Well, it sounds really, I didn't realize how complex it is. It's not just like plopping a tree down into the soil and let it grow, but you're enhancing the ecosystem with bacterial, fungal, from the soil level, right, too. So you really have to work on that and for a tree to thrive and grow properly. And so you're doing a lot of research. Kudos. That's great.
Yeah.
How long? A lot of hard work. So how long does it take for a previously clear-cut area to restore, when you consider all these complex systems?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. And when you're in an old growth forest, it's like, well, how long did it take to create a healthy, complex system?
Yeah.
And old growth forests are thousands of years old. Thousands. I mean, even if a tree is 3,000 years old or 2,000 years old, you could imagine the forest is much older than even that. So once a place is clear cut, to get that place to have old growth characteristics, we're going to really need thousands of years of it being protected from greedy hands. And it's, some people think, oh, well, we can get it back to old growth characteristics in 200 years. And it's like, well, not really. I think in 200 years, things can look really good and soil can grow back and trees can get big and we can see some of the complexity come back. And I don't think that, there's not truth to that, but just the complexity of 1,000-year-old forests, the reason they got so complex is because of time and because of leaf litter and branches and trunks, just, being eaten up by fungi and creating soil and all of the layers and layers and layers of decay that creates that richness and the time that it takes some mosses take 30 years to grow into, proper sized moss patch. So, proper size, that's a subjective term, but it's just to say this takes time. And in this culture, we're so obsessed with fast, instant gratification, want now, that it's really challenging to admit that it's going to take time. And yes, we can do certain things and that can help aid the process and in a way speed up the process, like planting trees and understory plants and focusing on soil growth. Of course, those things all help, but we have to be patient and we have to realize that we're not going to see a lot of the growth in our lifetimes. And how can we be okay with that? How can we devote ourselves to forest protection and forest restoration, knowing that we are not going to be able to pat ourselves on the back and be like, look we did it. We took a clear cut to an old growth forest in 10 years. It's like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Or 20 years or even 30 years. And so there's a type of control that we have to release in that, and that there can be a lot of beauty in that and a lot of humility. And I think as humans, there's so much hubris and supremacy that we are conducting over the planet right now. And I think for us to step back in humility and realize we don't know everything, we actually know very little, and our lifetimes are very short, and we can do what we can do, and then we can rest. And that's the best we can do. And there is beauty in that simplicity. Instead of us feeling like we can somehow be saviors, I think that has gotten us in a lot of trouble, to feel like we are these all-powerful beings, although we are very powerful and we're seeing the negative effects of our power. But yeah, the way that I approach forestry is with a lot of reverence and just feeling like I can understand my place in the cycle. And yeah, it's amazing work. It's a lot of work, but it's beautiful work.
It is very beautiful. And I don't know if it's our line of work or the people that we're involved with, but you mentioned there is so much bad being done. I'm starting to hear more, I guess, awareness about people doing the stepping back and learning a little bit more and becoming part of nature. And I hope that's a trend that continues. And, do you see that happening?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely do see that more and more people are awakening, for sure. I see that. I see, when I was talking about climate change 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, people didn't really care that much. People didn't want to hear about it. Exactly. It wasn't front page news every day about climate change, or extinction crisis issues. That wasn't being talked about in the way that it is now. So I think there's a lot more interest. I think there is more media around what's happening, but I don't think people know what to do about it. So it's kind of, it's a precarious situation, because I don't always think that more information leads to knowing what to do, or even it's not always even helpful. If we're just totally bombarded with so much that it puts us in a tailspin to where we can't even focus on our own backyards, like, that's an issue. I think it's important for us to understand what's happening in Australia, and the fact that there was 1 billion animals lost, and that climate change has pushed that country to the brink. I think it's important for us to know that. But for those of us in the United States who don't have a direct connection to Australia or can really do anything about policy down there, we should understand it, but then we should take that information and gear it towards what we can do. And so I think people are so overwhelmed and really confused. And the more and more bad news we hear, I feel like the more and more people are just like, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to just keep going on as business as usual. I'm just going to keep waking up, and I'm going to keep living my life, and I'm not going to really make changes because I don't really know how. It's not going to make a difference, and I'm just going to keep living my life, and I'll keep hearing this bad news, but I'm just going to keep living my life the same way. And I think partially it's like, I don't know what to do, or it's not going to make a difference, or kind of that vibe. And I think partially it's that so many of us are so extremely addicted to fossil fuels, to this modern lifestyle, to convenience, to luxury. And what I mean by luxury, I don't mean when I say luxury, I don't mean, I don't even know what to say, mansions. I mean electricity, hot water, Amazon.com orders, things that seem almost just normal to many people in the United States. That is actual, real luxury. And people have become so addicted and used to that at this point that it's really hard to imagine giving that up for many people. And I've had to, for the last decade, I have really been psychologically working with myself to learn how to give things up and to sacrifice in a beautiful way and realize I can't have all these things if I want the salmon to survive.
Exactly.
I can't have all these luxuries if I want orca to survive. It's not going to work like that. We can't have it all. We cannot have our cake and eat it too. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing that that is killing the planet. But that's a very hard thing to get through to people and say, yeah, your modern convenient lifestyle, you, not the corporations. Like I think it's a really hard when we're like, oh, it's the corporations. It's the corporations. Yes, of course, it's by design, and I'm not blaming anybody, any one of us, that it was our choice and it was our mistake that we created this, and now look at what happened. No, I think this has been by design by bigger systems, but we are still buying into these systems almost daily, if not hourly. Mm-hmm. And so breaking that addiction is extremely challenging and heartbreaking and full of grief. And if we want to,
I can hear your doggy.
If we want to really rise up and protect what we say we love, we have to understand our consumption and how it plays a part. And so, yeah, I think it's like people are awakening. I don't think most people know what to do. They feel overwhelmed. And like the last thing people want to do is change their lifestyle, you know?
Yeah.
But that's like the thing we all have to do. So it's a really tricky. And a lot of times I think that we're not going to change collectively until we're forced to. Mm-hmm. And that may be what it takes. Maybe we'll all have a collective awakening and decide that salmon and orca and bear and clean water and clean air are more important than Amazon.com. Maybe we'll decide that one day. I would love that. And you know, we'll see. I think the next few years are going to be extremely telling. And I'm definitely strapped in. I'm like, all right, this is going to be crazy, but you know, this is the ride we're on. We can't get off at this point.
Exactly. We're stuck on the ride. I wanted to go on to, before we run out of time, I guess, I wanted to make sure we talk about your film, When Old Growth Ends. And,
oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a beautiful film. And I believe, you know, you did the narration. March did the writing, I believe. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really
yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this was all shot, I believe, in the Tongass National Forest, which is in the southeast panhandle of Alaska. Can you talk about that? You did a beautiful job just depicting what happens and very powerful images. If you can explain anything about the creation of that and anything you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gosh. Well, where do I begin? As you probably have picked up, I'm really in love with old growth forest. Mm-hmm. And when I was realizing how little old growth we have left, it was really devastating. I was like an old growth chaser, you know, just looking on maps and try to find every little patch I could and spend time with those trees. And I had found out, I think in 2012, 2013, that we were, as a country, as citizens of the United States, we were subsidizing to log the last remaining old growth forest on our public lands in the Tongass National Forest. And when I heard that, I was shocked. I was outraged. I couldn't believe it, because here I was literally searching for the last remnants of old growth. And then here flip on the right. And then here on the other side, I'm literally paying for them to be logged on our public lands that we are supposedly the owners of. So I just couldn't believe it. And I interviewed Tom Waldo, who is a lead attorney for Earth Justice in the Alaska offices, and found out more information. And at that point, I just felt this urge that I needed to go up there. I needed to be with the forest. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I should do, but I just felt that I needed to be there. I needed to bear witness, even if that's all I did, even if all I did was just to be with those trees, be with that place and say, like, I see you, I love you, I'm devastated, I'm ashamed, I'm grieving, and I'm here and I'm acknowledging that this is happening to you. I'm not just going on as business as usual. I'm not just seeing a Instagram or Facebook post that you're being slaughtered and just then moving on with my day. Mm-hmm. And so it was really important on a personal, relational level with the forest that I was willing to be with them. And so I like, I don't even remember what year this was, maybe 2014. I got in my truck with my camper and I got my 2 dogs, and we were driving up to Alaska on Vancouver Island. I was on Vancouver Island at the time on the drive up, and I ended up looking to go to this other old growth forest, and my truck, well, my right front tire blew and I ended up going off a cliff, and
oh my gosh,
my truck tossed and turned, and the camper got completely ripped off the back, and it was bolted in, so you can imagine the impact. And my truck was ended up landing jackknifed, but it was held up by this one big leaf maple tree. And I didn't have a seatbelt on. It was an old truck. It was like all of my chains and chainsaw ended up trapping me in the truck. It was this really intense moment. But the miracle was that I was able to work my way out. Both my dogs were alive and uninjured. And I just had a cut on my arm, and I climbed up to this logging road that I had, gone off of. And I realized, okay, well, I can't get up to Alaska this year. So I came back down, but I was just in so much awe that I had been protected by this big leaf maple. And I just vowed to the forest again. I said, I already wanted to give my life to you, but even more, I am here. You have not only kept me alive, but you've kept my animals alive. And so I think it was the 2 years later, or maybe this was 2015, then 2016 happens, and I'm at this women's conference or women's gathering, and I was, I had my soapbox, and the Tongass is being slaughtered, all the time, all these 5 days. And there was 10 women that were there, one being an amazing videographer. And they were like, we'll go with you. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know these women. They didn't know each other. We were literally all strangers. And a month later, 10 of us got to this island, Prince of Wales, off the coast of Alaska, and we did not know what we were doing. We did not have a shot list. We did not have a script. We were all extremely inexperienced. We had never done that type of Indigenous allyship building. There was just so many naive, just not unknowings. And so we spent a couple weeks up there. And like I said, we were literally just getting random shots in a lot of ways, and we were trying to feel into it. And so when I came home, it took about a year of me huffing and puffing and stressing out, trying to figure out how do I edit this, and what's the story, and where am I going with this? And I don't want to make a normal documentary with talking heads, but I want to get through the story of the salmon, and I really want to talk about the existential crisis that led us to cutting the last remaining trees. And I wanted it to be a love offering to the forest and an ode to the forest. And so with the mix of all these emotions and passion and unpredictability, I created this 13-minute, it's an experimental love song to the forest that is really questioning this sickness in us and our purpose in this life. And it's beautiful. I mean, Leslie, who's the director of photography, is absolutely incredible. So visually, I was so stunned by the beauty that she was able to show through her lens, and March did an amazing job writing, and it was beautiful. I felt really good about that film. But I also knew that it wasn't enough, and that, part of the film was about helping to support keeping roadless rule in place, which is a rule that says there will not be any more roads built in the Tongass, and there won't be more resource extraction other than the places that had already been agreed upon. So I knew that the film would help with that, but it wasn't enough. And I needed to really work with community members on the ground and Indigenous people on the ground. And so I'd gone up a few more every summer, actually, since that. And in December, when the public comment was open for Roadless Rule, I released 2 in the field episodes. And in the field episodes are different than regular episodes because they're actually in the field and they're a different type of production. I released 2 episodes with Kashutaha Kulp, who is a native Tlingit woman from Huna, and Kasayage, who's another Tlingit elder woman from Huna. And they're 2 really beautiful, devastating, loving episodes that explains what's happening to the Tongass through their perspective and talks about the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and Native corporations and climate change and species extinction and old growth logging. Because, I came up to learn about old growth logging, but once I opened, it was like a Pandora's box, basically. And although I came up for that, I realized that there is so much more, and the social justice elements are so intertwined with the resource extraction of the trees and then the mining, that it's an intense story to follow. And what's happening in that region is the salmon are collapsing, and the forests are being logged, and climate change is drying up that rainforest. And it's horrifying to be in the presence of what we're losing, because where I live in the Redwoods, I'm in the presence of what has already been lost. Mm-hmm. And so it's very different down here. Up there, it's, the last vestiges of these intact ecosystems are just being torn apart. And so, the film is, if anybody wants to watch it, it's at the website for thewild.world, and it's under the tab when old growth ends, our land-based commitments. And it's really just, I wanted to create a film that wasn't just informational, but it was also speaking to the emotional, psychological elements. And I really wanted people to walk away questioning, more questions than answers. And hopefully that's what happened.
Yeah, that's what I walked away with. It's a good visual, and the writing and your voice and your tone, how calm it is throughout the whole film. I picture it as a love letter, but it's also very impactful to make you think, and to ask those questions. So I will definitely post the link. You're welcome. You guys did a great job. What is happening with the roadless rule right now? I know that was, it's probably still under threat, is my guess.
The public comments ended December 17th, and I have yet to hear like a ruling or anything regarding what what the outcome was in terms of what the Forest Service is going to do. Obviously, the Forest Service was willing to open it back up, which it took 20 years to create Roadless Rule and put it in place. And then 2 years after everything was said and done and the bows were, everything was wrapped up, 2 years later, boom, it gets reopened. So it's precarious, and I think it really shows us that no place is ever protected forever. It's really the community that is the community around that place and the community that loves those places that are going to keep those places safe, because like what's happening with the rollbacks on public land protections, Bears Ears, Grand Escalante, Tongass, this will keep happening, and we just need to stay really strong that we can win the fight, or we can win a battle, but the war will continue. Mm-hmm. And no place is safe forever. And so the Tongass, as frustrating as it is that it took 20 years to put Roadless Rule in place, and then 2 years after that, it's being questioned. It's like, are you kidding me? This is crazy. But, that's the world we live in. And so we have to be really vigilant. And I will see. My prayer is that there was enough public comments, and with climate change, they're realizing that sequestering the carbon is more financially and environmentally beneficial than taking the logs in an industry that's dying, in an industry that is subsidized because it doesn't make money, and that it isn't actually creating jobs in a big way, and it's really not profitable or good for anybody, and it's killing the salmon and so on and so forth. So hopefully they'll realize that, and time will tell. And if they don't realize that, I will definitely be doing whatever I can on my end to amplify the voices from the ground so that this place can be as protected as it can be.
I know we're kind of running over on time a little bit, and I know you're very busy. Among the many hats you wear, you are host of the weekly podcast called For the Wild, and you have some really good conversations with people talking about Anthropocene, but also just about how to survive in such times. And the topics are very good. There's some very in-depth conversations on what to do during these times, I think. And in your words, what is the message you want to give your listeners in your podcast?
That's such a good question. What is the message? Well, yeah, it's going to be a rambling message, but there's a number of things. One, I want people to feel that they're not alone, that I know how overwhelming this time is when you're awake to the realities. I know that it's painful and overwhelming, and I want people to feel like they have community, even if it's not physically around them, but they have community that sees what they see, that feels the depth of what they're feeling, and is willing to sit in the fire of these realities and not turn away, and not make I don't want people to, because I remember I used to feel like, oh, I was annoying to talk about these things, or people didn't really want me to bring it up. And it was crazy making to be not only living through this time where things were just being going extinct around me, like major chaos, major struggle was happening. But then at the same time, nobody wants to talk about it. And nobody wants to really do much about it. It's really crazy making. So I definitely want to have people feel like they're seen and they are not alone. And also I want people to feel activated, that I want people to know that every one of us is important, and the movement towards Earth protection is really in need of every single person to step up and do their part. And everybody's part is not going to look the same, and that's okay. And there's beauty in that. And I also want people to know what's actually happening, and that things are really as bad as they seem, that it isn't, like we have to know what's happening, so that it stokes our fire enough for us to feel brave, to feel like we have to do something about it, because that's where we're in. We have to be courageous. And so I hope also that's a message that comes through, is that we're not alone. Now is the time to be courageous together. And there can be joy and beauty, and we can hold the complexity of the grief and the love and all of it. It's all comes together. It's not all sad and it's not all happy, but that's life, regardless of climate change was happening. That's just what it is to be human. And so we're also a place that, it's really about holding the complexity and the intersectionality of climate, environmental, and social justice together, because you can't have one type of justice without the other. Liberation is collective. And I think it's also really important for the audience to know that.
That's good. Very well said. A good message. So how can people listen to your podcast?
Well, luckily it's on a bunch of places. It's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on a lot of different, like Podbean, and pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts, you can find it. Or you could listen on our website at forthewild.world. We have the whole archive. I think we're up to like 160 episodes now.
Wow.
So
busy.
All of it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so just, or Google us, I know we'll come up and you can listen to us there too.
Awesome. I'll also post the link in the show notes as well. Do you have any last words of wisdom you want to share with our audience before we get on with our day?
Yeah, I guess I'll just leave you with stand where you love and fight like hell. Now is the time to be really engaged. It's now. It's, no time to waste. And it's so fulfilling to be devoted to land, to a place that you love, to the creatures you love, to the humans you love. There's nothing more fulfilling. So it's going to be intense, but it's going to ultimately feel, I think, really good. So just get out there and do your part.
Well said. Well, thank you so much, Ayana. I love talking with you. It was very informative, and yeah. Thank you for all you do for everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and this has been a great chat.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio. Links and resources to today's topic are in our show notes on iTunes. We appreciate your dedication and interest in protecting our natural world for future generations. If you like what you heard, please get involved by volunteering, donating, and sharing these podcasts with your friends. It also helps us to inform more people if you take a minute to leave a rating or review on iTunes. Have a great day, and thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio.